Data labels provide good explanatory information for charts, and you can add them in a number of different ways. We don't have them on this chart here or on the sheet year data, but if we click here, two quick ways to get there could be by way of the plus button. We see data labels off to the right. You might click there first and maybe see more labels than we hope to get. Let's uncheck that. Another approach that ultimately is the same is to go on the Design tab, leftmost button, Add Chart Elements, and then pursue Data Labels. Here, a slightly different view, but the same general idea. We get a few more visible options here as to where those numbers might appear. Some of them completely unacceptable, and some of them perhaps useful. Now, another approach could be, let's just go to Quick Layout. This is a button we see on the Design tab, second button from the left. Some of the choices here, and as we slide over them, you will see data labels, and you can probably see ahead of time where they might or might not be. Not always, but as we look at some of these options here. For example, this could be another way to get there kind of quickly if you want that kind of labeling. So different approaches here. And another approach too, possibly with the chart selected, you go to Chart Styles. Now this tends to be more about the background colors and the shading and so on, but some of these might have numbers like this one here. And different styles. As we look at some of the numbers here, they're rotated 90 degrees and so on. So we've got different ways to get here. If you want to be a little bit more methodical about it, let's say we choose either the plus button here or on the Design tab, that leftmost button, Add Chart Element. So using the plus button, let's go to Data Labels this way and click the arrow to the right. And as we slide over these choices, remember we did see this also from the Add Chart Element button, but we see them here also. We could pursue some of these, but if we're looking for even more, how about more options? And that opens the appropriate dialog box. And possibly in here we'll uncheck value for one of these. Maybe what we really want here is just the values for the blue columns. So let's bring that back. And I'm going to click one of the gray columns. The options to the right are not appropriate right now. Go back to the plus button here and choose Data Labels again, the arrow to the right, more options. And we could, like we did before, choosing this button first, not show the value for the gray ones. And let's do the same thing with the orange column here. Once again, we'll have to go back to the plus here, Data Labels off to the right, more options. Go to Label Options again and not show the value that way. So it could be a case of where you want numbers, but only on the blue columns. Lots of variations here. Now, notice something else that we could do here. I'm going to get rid of the gray columns simply by clicking one of them and press Delete. In other words, I'm saying I don't want to show Asia in this list right now. And at a later time, I've changed my mind again. I don't want to show Europe. So I'll click one of the orange columns and press Delete. And so what we could also consider doing here on the labels now, considering some rotation. Now this is going to make sense if we make these columns wider. And we do that effectively not by actually making the columns wider, but by changing the gap in between them. So by double clicking one of the columns, off to the right we'll see gap width. I'm going to change that down to say 20 or 50 or something like that. And you'd want to experiment with that a little bit. So that gives a different look and feel to the chart. And it's more appropriate maybe when you've only got one series, possibly two. But we could make some changes now going back to data labels that might be a little bit different, maybe a little bit more appropriate now than they would have been when we had those different kinds of narrow columns. Outside end, but inside end. We see how the numbers are being displayed now. So that's another variation, possibly that way. Easier to read maybe, but what if the numbers were white instead of black? So click one of the numbers, notice how they're all selected there. We could then go to the Home tab and use a white font. And that may or may not be better. Make it bold while we're there too. Lots of variations, or possibly increase the size of the font. Maybe that's better. So lots of options here, and you could spend a lot of time going through some of the variations, but having labels on columns and or bars will make some sense. Sometimes it's way too crowded. We saw that in some of the earlier examples, but from time to time you will want to be adding labels here. Now, what if we were to create a pie chart? I've got this data highlighted here. I'll go to the Insert tab. There's the option for pie. I'll choose a 3D pie. Looks pretty good there. Make it a bit larger maybe. Let's add some data labels here. Using the plus, data labels. Immediately we see values. That could be good enough. We have a legend at the bottom that explains the colors. But here too, we'd want to possibly pursue this a bit further. Before doing that though, remember, possibly by way of quick layout, This is on the left side of the Design tab, second button from the left. Some of these options in here show percent as well as month. That might be a good choice. And some of them show the month and the value. But possibly we want all three. So we see some variations this way. And it wouldn't be a bad idea possibly to pick one of these and then go over to Data Labels and choose more options and consider some of the choices we might want to use there. Once again, going to the Label Options button here and Label Options, we're not showing the value right now, but we're showing the category name. Those are the months. Why not add the values? Now again, it may or may not be appropriate at some times. It might be too crowded. One thing to do here that would make this better, potentially, Home tab, change the font size to be a bit larger. See what's happening there? Somewhere in there maybe. Make it be bold, possibly. And you might or might not see the presence of leader lines. This option here is always shown, but it isn't always meaningful. So in this case here, possibly because of a dark green background, if I were to click outside of the pie, click back here, click only that label, again, to select that, pull it out here. Possibly here, can't see the text at all. So that might be appropriate. And when you have a pie with many, many sectors in it, and I know that's a subjective term, but as we move this around a little bit, I think you can see where it might make some sense. Probably what you'd want to do here, and it might be a little bit tedious, is do this for all of them, but sometimes you run out of space as to where to put these. And that's happening to me right now a little bit. But I think you can begin to see how potentially there's some value to this. Again, as I'm doing this too, I'm probably disproving that point. It gets a little awkward at times, but you see some variations here. And I think in certain kinds of situations, not only with the pie chart, but the column chart we saw before, adding data labels makes good sense. It provides good additional visual documentation as to what the columns and or the pie sectors actually mean.